You know, originally I was planning to do Sonic Rush and Rush Adventure in the same video because if you can't tell watching the gameplay here, these two games play basically identically to one another. There are a couple of small differences in Rush Adventure, but honestly they are so minimal that they're not even really worth talking about. But there are enough things about this game that I think are different from Sonic Rush that I think are worthy of it being its own video in terms of the other stuff outside of the core gameplay. Though while I am here, I guess I will talk a little bit about the core gameplay of Sonic Rush a little bit more because there are some things that I left out of the initial video. Mainly small things, like for example, when you have infinite boost meter and that runs out, you're going to lose a certain amount of meter. You're going to lose like a third of the meter that you had if you were actually using the boost during the infinite meter time, but if you don't, you actually still get to have full meter, and you just need to do any one thing that gives you meter to just reactivate infinite boost again. And that can sometimes give you a reason not to boost even if you have infinite meter if it's a situation where you're not really gonna benefit from it very much. There's also this weird property in these games where your ground speed will actually be preserved when you jump into the air, where when you jump, you do get air drag and that does slow you down, but once you hit the ground, you immediately revert back to the speed you had the last time you were touching the ground, which can enable you to do some weird stuff where you can, like, slow down and then instantly gain a burst of speed. But on the other hand, this does enable you to do pretty cool things, because another thing I left out in the last video is that the boost actually isn't the fastest you can possibly go in Sonic Rush. There are actually ways to accelerate above the speed that the boost will normally give you. Mainly, I've noticed you can do this pretty easily when you're grinding on rails or doing air tricks. You can convert that speed into running on the ground sometimes. You can also use slope jumps to exceed the boost's normal speed. So look at that, we still got some momentum mechanics in here, even with the boost. Also, some horizontal springs will launch you off with more speed than you're going to get just from a boost alone. And so similarly to the more momentum-focused Sonic games, you can actually try to preserve this increased movement speed and take it as far as you can to go faster. One little annoyance that I forgot to mention in the previous video is that the trick button when you're in the air and grinding on rails are set to buttons that also do normal things in normal gameplay. Like, tricking in the air uses one of the jump buttons, and so it's very easy to be doing a bunch of air tricks and then unexpectedly hit a rail or something, and then you end up jumping when you didn't want to. And similarly, doing tricks on rails uses the, like, directional trick button when you're in the air, and that can become a problem when you're grinding on rails trying to do tricks, and then suddenly you get launched into the air, and now you do like a forward trick when you didn't want to, and that can kind of fuck you up. I definitely would have preferred if they just had a dedicated trick button that didn't do anything else. That's a little bit annoying, and it's just something you have to get used to. Another thing I forgot, and this is not something I forgot to mention, this is just something I completely forgot, is that when you're doing tricks in the air, there is actually a different type of trick you can do that acts as like a trick ender that will give you more boost meter than normal tricks do depending on how many tricks you did while in the air. And this comes with the trade-off of the fact that you can no longer do tricks after you do this ender. This can enable you to get much more meter much more quickly, and in the right circumstances, you can even use it to extend the length of your infinite meter in situations where there are large gaps between opportunities to refresh it. Just adding this into my play while playing Sonic Rush Adventure, I noticed so many more opportunities where if I'm playing well and playing smart and tricking appropriately, I don't need to stop boosting nearly as much as I did when in Sonic Rush, and I bet you could probably do the same for that game as well. So that's pretty much all I wanted to say with the core gameplay here. Like I said, this game plays essentially just like the first Rush, so anything that applies to one also applies to the other for the most part. So now we're just going to jump straight into all the other parts of the Sonic games, beginning with the boss fights. And you know what? I gotta really hand it to them this time, for real now. They fixed up the bosses a lot in Sonic Rush Adventure compared to Rush. They are a lot better now. The bosses are a lot more active. They do not have you just standing around doing nothing. nearly as much as they did in the first game. Now there is much less time in between attacks, so much more time where you're actively doing things, and that just improves the pacing of the fights so much. And then the fights are still as complex and nuanced as they were in Sonic Rush, but now without the problem there. And they've also added a new thing to Sonic Rush, which is pretty cool, where when a boss makes itself vulnerable, you don't just hit them once and bounce off. Now you actually have the chance to hit them multiple times to get some extra damage in. And this can give you an opportunity to, if you're good at the game, kill the bosses faster, as you need less vulnerability cycles in order to kill them. Because once you mess up and hit the ground, the boss ends its vulnerability, so you have to try to make sure that you don't accidentally get launched away. On the first couple of bosses, this is pretty easy to do. It's essentially free, but once you get to like the last couple of bosses, you really need some precision in order to make this work, because the way that you jump off the boss is based on like the trajectory you had when you hit their weak point. And this can make a pretty big difference in how long it takes you to beat certain bosses, and this really feels very appropriate for Sonic, a way for players that are better to beat bosses faster than others. Great improvement there. The bosses here are all around vastly improved over the first Rush game, and I would now say that these are probably the best bosses in the entire Sonic series so far. I really don't have that much to complain about when it comes to the bosses in this game for like the first time in Sonic. Getting S ranks on them is still not the best thing in the world, primarily now because the bosses, because their AI is randomized, they will take inconsistent amounts of time to kill because, you know, sometimes they'll do more of the attack that takes longer and that will eat up more time. And even if you fight a boss really, really well, killing him as quickly as possible, hitting him as much as possible every time he's vulnerable, you still might just not get the S rank because the AI just did not enable you to, which is pretty shitty, but that's more of a problem with how strict the S rank timings are, relative to the fact that the bosses are inconsistent in how long they take to beat. Also, another small note here that I don't exactly love, but I understand why it's done, and it's not that big of a problem. The bosses in this game run at 30 FPS, as opposed to normal gameplay, which is at 60. I guess it makes sense with how big and elaborate these bosses can be, but it feels pretty shitty to be playing a game at 60 FPS and then get knocked down to 30 every now and again. Anyway, the next thing I want to talk about is the biggest defining factor of Sonic Rush Adventure compared to Rush 1, which is that the structure of the game has been changed up quite a bit. You know, Sonic Rush was a very straightforward, traditional Sonic game where you just did the zones and went zone to zone, playing through the game and going forward, no problem. And it had the thing where you had to play through the game both as Sonic and as Blaze in order to get access to the last story and beat the game. That has been changed here in Sonic Rush Adventure. Now you have a shared campaign where you can just switch between Sonic and Blaze whenever you want, which I definitely think is better, but this also means that there's not nearly as much padding in Rush Adventure as there was in Rush, because you don't have to play the game twice. And of course, as is the case with Sonic games, we can't not have padding here, and so they have added a very significant sailing feature to Sonic Rush Adventure, where now you have this whole sea chart, and you sail from island to island, and these islands will act as the different zones of the game. And to get from zone to zone, you actually have to play these sailing minigames where you're in some kind of vehicle and you use the touchscreen in order to travel the distance. And you have multiple different vehicles here that all play a little bit differently from each other. Like, you got this little jet ski, which you control by just manually controlling it with the touchscreen, kind of similar to the special stages in Sonic Rush. And then you have, like, this ship here, where you have a bunch of weapons, and you click on enemies in order to kill them. You have this, like, jet hoverboat thing that's similar to the jet ski, but now you have a gun that you can shoot with. You have a submarine where it kind of plays almost like a bit of a rhythm game kind of thing. And as you progress further and further into the game, you're going to unlock more of these vehicles and they'll give you access to more and more of the map. And I mean, I don't necessarily hate this particularly. The sailing sequences don't really take that long. They're like a minute, maybe 2 minutes tops in between just playing the normal levels. But this is certainly not nearly as fun as the core gameplay of the game, and it kind of just gets in the way. It's not awful, but it's also like, I don't really care about this. I don't really want to do it. But also, the entire structure of how sailing in this game works is just very, like, I don't know. This feels like Sonic is kind of falling victim to its arcade roots more than it should be, because I could totally see myself getting into this whole sailing, exploring the ocean, and trying to find all the different islands and stuff if it was done in a way more akin to Wind Waker and how sailing works in that game, where it's just an open sea and you can just sail in any direction and just go to islands directly. That would be a lot cooler. But instead, every time you start sailing, you have to plot out the chart that you're going to travel on, and that is the only thing you can do. Once your course is plotted, then you just go into the minigame and you have no ability to steer, you just automatically follow the trail that you lined out. And it's just like, that's not the fun of sailing. In sailing, you want that freedom to just go wherever you want, man. That would have been a lot more enjoyable. Maybe this is a thing because, you know, it's just a handheld game, so a whole big free open ocean thing might not have been as achievable, I don't know. But I certainly think that would have been more fun and more engaging. And the thing about getting these different vehicles is another thing about Sonic Rush Adventure that can definitely be kind of not the best in the world. Because in order to build these new crafts, you need to collect materials to put them together. And you get these materials for completing levels. Every zone has its own material that you get for beating levels in that zone. And so eventually you'll get to points in the story where you have to build a new vehicle and you need enough materials of different kinds in order to put it together. And if you don't already have enough of every material, you're gonna have to go back and replay levels in order to collect more of them. But this is something that I personally don't really have that much issue with. In fact, in a certain way, I kind of like what this adds to the game. Because one thing that's nice about this system is that you get more materials for completing levels with higher ranks. So the better you play throughout the game, the less you're going to have to go back and replay levels in order to collect more materials. Where at the same time, if you play poorly through the game, then you're not going to have a lot of materials, and yes, the game does force you to go back and replay levels, but this is also an opportunity for you to improve at the game. Now the game is telling you you didn't do good enough, so go back and try to get better. And now you complete the levels again, and naturally you're going to want to try to get better ranks so you don't have to replay levels as much, and so you are encouraged to try to get better at the game this way. It actually gives a tangible benefit to getting S ranks beyond just getting the S rank, which I think is good. Maybe the exact way they go about it here isn't the best, because people don't really like having to replay stuff if they don't want to, but at the same time, I struggle to have that much of an issue with it because, I mean, these levels are super fun and replayable, and they're only like 2 or 3 minutes long tops, so what's really the problem here? While you're sailing around, beyond just the main zones that you can find on the big islands, there are also a couple of other things that you can find out in the ocean. There are these smaller hidden islands that you can find that kind of act as small bonus levels. And when I say small, I mean small. Some of these levels you can beat in like 15 seconds. And these are kind of just like mini-game style levels that are particularly focused on like one gimmick or one element of the gameplay. There's not really that much to them, although weirdly one of them is just a straight-up remake of the first level from the first Sonic Rush. I mean, that's kind of cool, but I could just play Sonic Rush if I wanted to do that. The other thing that you can find while sailing out in the ocean is you can find Johnny, who is this robot character that Sonic can race in the jet ski in, and if you beat Johnny in these races, this is how you get the Chaos Emeralds. You have to find where Johnny is in all 7 of the different locations, and then you have to beat him in those races. And, you know, these are okay. They're not particularly great special stages, I would say. They're fine, they're okay. I don't hate them, I don't love them. They're kind of just whatever. I do definitely prefer the special stages in the first Sonic Rush. And one thing that I ran into while playing this is I found the last 2 of these special stages unimaginably difficult. One of them took me like 40 freaking minutes to do, but I later realized that's because you can actually upgrade the jet ski once you beat the game, and I didn't know that, and I didn't do it, so I did these with the unupgraded jet ski, and I imagine it probably would have been a lot easier if I had the upgraded one. Whoops! Pro tip, if you're gonna try to do these, wait until you beat the game and get the upgraded jet ski first. And while in the first Sonic Rush you collected the Soul Emeralds just by playing through Blaze's campaign, this time around you actually do have to do something to get them, Because another feature that this game has is it has a little bit of a hub world here in the form of this map, and you can go to these different locations and walk around a little bit. And in these little hubs, you can talk to NPCs, and they'll give you missions to do. And these missions are not great. A lot of them are literally just doing stuff that you've already done before. And when I say literally, I mean literally. Some of these missions, the mission description is beat the boss again, and that's the mission. So a lot of these just constitute beating a boss again, completing a level again, but there are ones that also try to mix things up a little bit. Some of the boss fights will be made a little bit more difficult, or you'll have to collect 100 doubloons while playing through a level, or you have to find a secret hidden chest somewhere, although it's not really hidden, there's an arrow just pointing you directly to where it is. Things like that. These missions are really not very good, and to be honest, I did not bother to do all of them because there are 100 of these freaking things that mainly just constitute doing things I've already done in the game before. But some of these missions, for completing them, you do get the soul emeralds, and so you have to at least do those missions if you want to get access to the final boss, which is your typical final boss supersonic thing, whatever. And yeah, that's pretty much Sonic Rush Adventure. I guess there is also this like time trial mode you can do with the vehicles where you can try to do like pre-made courses in under a certain time. If you want to do that, if you find that gameplay to be enjoyable enough for that. Personally, I don't really care for it, but you know, time attack in Sonic games is always fun, and it was fun in the first Rush game, and it's fun here in Rush Adventure 2. And actually, something I did forget to mention earlier is that some of the level design in Rush Adventure I would say is improved upon over Sonic Rush. Because, for one, they have done away with those sequences where they would lock you in a room with a bunch of enemies and you just have to kill them. Those are totally gone, which is great. And as for the kind of scripted set-piece moments where they're kind of auto-scrollers, those have been significantly reduced, where they really don't last very long at all. They're really just like a couple of seconds now, which is totally fine and not nearly as intrusive into the gameplay. Overall, the level design of Sonic Rush Adventure, I would say, is pretty much exactly on par with Sonic Rush, but those two things alone basically just make Sonic Rush Adventure a superior game. As far as the core gameplay is concerned, some people might not really love all the extra side stuff that have been added to the game, but I don't really mind those things too much. I don't think they get in too much of the way. So actually, I like Sonic Rush Adventure even more than the first game. I think that it's mostly just improved over the first. So that's all I really have to say about Sonic Rush Adventure. Once again, really good Sonic game, highly recommended. Thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed. I'll see you next time.